Cool. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, our next panel, Braden Ream, CEO of Voiceflow. We've got Darragh Keogh over here in the middle there, who is the Chief Product Officer at 3 UK. We've got Joseph Suskin at the end here from the Conversation Design Institute, Nat Walker, Vodafone, and Grace Hughes here from Accenture, who are going to be talking about the evolving conversation design workflow. So if Brett has set the scene incredibly well there in terms of the market landscape and what we're all interested in and where things are at, and this panel here is going to discuss the practicalities of actually using this technology to get things done and to be effective. So ladies and gentlemen, please, round of applause for our panel.
All righty. Hi, everyone. Before we get started, I just want to say 4 years ago, those who are in the space, we wouldn't have dreamed of having a conversation design conference. So can we just get another round of applause for the organizers of Unparsed here? It's pretty unbelievable. We're super excited. Now, some housekeeping for this panel. We're going to try to keep it super fast-paced. We're going to try to get through questions fairly quick, try to keep it really engaging, and try to have some fun at the same time. So, my very first question is, where should the conversation design team sit within the organization? Something that a lot of folks think about. There's a lot of different opinions on it. And with that, Nat, you're up first.
Oh, what a massive question to start with, firstly. I think there's pros and cons for it sitting in different areas. If you establish your conversation design team as part of a design function, you're probably going to naturally have more influence across the whole design strategy or progression for your company. At Vodafone, we did it slightly differently, where it's not necessarily called a centre of excellence, but it's a specialised team made up of product, bit of engineering and design. And the pros there is we can deliver to our own aims fairly easily. And actually, we've managed to build like a really good conversation design practice. So one that at Vodafone, we would call them full stack conversation designers, do a bit of everything. So it's not limited purely to the upfront design or envisioning the design. They are actually developing it, working with back-end engineers and seeing the whole journey through. So had that been established in a design function, that wouldn't have been possible just by the nature of them.
Grace, what do you think?
Thanks. So it's a tough question. Because I can see pros and cons to conversation design as a practice being in different parts of the organization. I mean, full disclosure, I'm part of the design team, and I think it can be really beneficial for conversation design to sit there because we can work with adjacent disciplines like interaction design, service design, and at the end of the day, that's what we're doing. We're creating interactions that are conversations. We're creating a service. But certainly within my organization, conversation designers are spotted all over the place, and we work really, really closely with technology. And interestingly, a lot of briefs actually come through to technology. So it's about making sure folks on those teams are aware of the need for conversation design and bring us in. Working with clients, I see so many different setups, and again, there are benefits to many of them, and pros and cons to all of them, I would say. We worked with clients to help create a centre of excellence, which can be great because, especially in the early stages of maturity, because you're building standards, you're getting folks trained up, you're looking at skills and how to increase those. Also, I've worked with clients where conversation designers actually come from the customer service teams. And what's great about that is that many of them have, all of them have experience, first-hand experience of the customer's problems, having been on the phone. And it can take a bit of time for them to become conversation designers. They may need training on processes and documentation on the principles of conversation design. But you may not think it, but conversation designers can get a really good foundation from a deep knowledge of customer service. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I think, if the team understands the need for a human-first approach to conversation design, if they're thinking deeply about the customer's problems, and suppose it doesn't matter where they sit, which is not a very clear answer, but I see, I can see benefits and across many different parts of the organization.
The quintessential answer in business is always, well, it depends. Darragh?
I think for me, it's going to depend heavily on scale of the enterprise at hand and also the industry as well. So I think for larger organizations, there's a bit of a barrier to just spinning up a conversation design center of excellence. I think it either needs to grow out of an existing UX house that's already there, or it needs to grow within a function within large enterprise and then demonstrate its value before kind of senior leaders in the business will be able to push investment that way. I think for smaller, more leaner businesses, and again, slightly dependent on the industry that they're in, foundationally, it's a bit more appropriate to start to work that across the functions, especially when you've got less people involved. And that's where I think you then start to be able to realise the benefits quicker of not just customer-facing conversation design, but also back-office conversation design for HR or finance functions. So ultimately, I think it needs to end up as a centre of excellence.
Yeah, I agree with Darragh, but in my experience where I am now with a very large enterprise, we were put into IT. Everybody has a title as some level of software engineer, which is really funny because no one on the team recognizes curly brackets for what they are. But I have tried to position the team as being the bridge between the business side of the house and the IT side of the house. Even though we're at daily stand-ups, the opportunities that voice or chat has for the business side of the house with respect to branding, not only problems, is beginning to get realized. So we're sitting as a bridge between the two because we interface with both on a daily basis. And from there, I'm hoping, like, as Darragh says, to grow it as a center of excellence as an entity within itself.
Yeah, and what we see at Voiceflow, we work with about 130,000 teams now. And sorry about that. At Voiceflow, we work with about 130,000 teams, and I think it really doesn't depend. It doesn't matter as much about the size of the company. It actually matters about, as Darragh mentioned, like the maturity of the operation. How many channels are you working with? How many languages? How many markets? What's the scale, right? And so I think what you often see in the early days is a small agile team that's multidisciplinary, maybe a single conversation designer. Then over time, you start to separate by channel, and eventually you sort of have more like a federated model, and then eventually you get to that like center of excellence working across multiple teams. And then also, I just want to put an asterisk on what Darragh said there, both internal and external use cases. Not just external customer support and chatbots, but even starting to do internal RPA, which I think is a really big opportunity for conversational AI. So moving forward, Darragh, this is a question for you specifically. As a product owner, how do you actually go about staffing a project? When you have a particular business goal in mind, like let's say it's to increase containment, how do you actually go about achieving that from a staffing perspective?
There's a reason we put someone in between me and that.
Yeah.
I think with that, again, I'll focus on my specific industry in telecoms. It's probably no secret that certainly in the UK, telco suffers from customers struggling to get in touch, issues with queue times, wait times. So we have to try and find an effective blend of building really good digital experiences to encourage self-serve, but then also trying to protect our aging population and some of the operating costs that are involved in running large call centres. So virtual assistants and building them for what we would consider appropriate containment, trying to encourage people to adopt self-serve. That's our primary raison d'etre, I suppose, for any kind of virtual assistant. To resource for that, it depends on the funding lines you've got available in the business, but largely I think the way to do it is to try and identify top talents that can be multi-skilled. Those dynamics are changing because of, Brett mentioned earlier about the software, and how that's moving on. So how we acquire those people and who we go after is definitely changing. But initially going for those multi-skilled people who can work, I think someone mentioned full stack, in effect that. We've seen really effective results going after, as we build out the team, particularly at Vodafone, we saw really good results when we went after people who had experience with frontline. So people who are already speaking to customers through the social media teams, through agents in telephony, on web chat, and actually just bringing that skill and that knowledge in-house and actually just uplifting them with the tools and the technology to support building out VAs. As you get more mature then, obviously you have to start to specialise. Inevitably, you're going to have to look outside the organisation, particularly when you start to look at NLUs and trying to optimise what you've got. But ultimately, I think it's grow within Braden as a start, and then try and spread out from there.
Can I just add something? To Darragh's point, like in Vodafone, what we've done is not exactly what he said. We've sourced from frontline staff because you will be amazed at how often they'll tell you you're wrong. You think something's the right thing for a customer? No. They've spoken to enough people often enough to tell you what the right direction is. And most people with experience with bots here would know that what people say isn't what they mean. And those frontline people are the translators between, hey, they said that, what they mean is this actually. So if we do that, we're going to get this right. And for even things like NLU, which on paper is a really technical role, our NLU training team came from a smaller social media bot that exists in Vodafone, and they've learned those skills to start training the model. Helps with low-code platforms, obviously, but that experience is so valuable.
Just to re-emphasise a point as well around the tooling, right? So at 3, we're at the beginning of our journey. We're quite greenfield, so that gives us extra flexibility. But the tooling and the development has come on so much, even in just the last half decade. We're finding now is building a team from scratch 5 years ago with the tools that were available would look very different to building with potentially single tools or even just 1 or 2 tools across the entire experience. And that means you're looking for very, very different people. So if you're planning any of this, I think the tooling and the people are intrinsically linked. I don't think you can decouple them.
I also thought it was interesting I just want to put an asterisk on. Nat mentioned the NLU training team, and what you start to see at the most sophisticated conversational AI teams is conversation design starts to proliferate into actually multiple sub-teams, where you'll have NLU training, bot trainers, there's a lot of titles in that space as well, conversation design, product owners. It starts to really spread out versus maybe a smaller team. It might just be a single full-stack conversation designer. They're handling the NLU model, they're handling the dialogues, they're handling passover to development. It's much more of a sort of a full-stack job. Now, if you had talking about LLMs on your bingo card, you are about to be able to cross that one off. Grace, this one is for you, and it's about personas. So you've been in copywriting for quite a while now. How has copywriting changed over the past 5 years? How do you design great personas when working with multiple brands, since you actually get to do that sort of at Accenture? And then the second part of it is, how are personas going to change with LLMs? So I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Braden. So as you've mentioned there, I've been working in the world of content for 18 plus years. So started in educational content, then went into advertising, copywriting, advertising and marketing copywriting, and then into content design and conversation design. So this question has made me reflect on, people often use these terms interchangeably, like copywriting, content writing, content creation. There's a big difference between advertising copywriting and content design and writing interface content and writing conversations. I think with advertising copy, it's very much about getting people's attention, right? And there's a lot of people who are really skilled at doing that. Whereas actually with good content design, good interface design is about the opposite of that. It's about, being in the background, letting people get what they need done. And I think that that's a very big difference between advertising content and interface content. I think, someone referred to UX writing or microcopy as, the oil that wheels the machine of the interaction. And I think it's very much that we need to think about when it comes to creating content for these interactions. I think to move on to the point about personality, I think, brand, of course, when we're designing a personality for a system, one of the first things we're going to look at is existing brand voice, tone of voice, etc. However, and Rebecca points this out in her book, Conversations with Things, brand personality and system personality or bot personality is not the same thing. So I think that, you know, sometimes people can get a bit distracted. They think personality has to be quirky, has to be funny, we need loads of humor, but it's not the case. It's not always the case. Nothing wrong with a little bit of color for sure, but I think when we're helping clients to design personalities, we think about the interaction goals and have that dictate the personality that we design. And, you know, sometimes when people just want to get something done, chit chat or, you know, overly long dialogues can just annoy them. So it's kind of about getting out of the way. And I think we worked on a voice user interface last year, and we were working closely with the advertising team, and we had to push back a lot, to be honest, about like them wanting to add in, you know, humorous comments. And, you know, I think it's just important to remember that, you know, as somebody said to me, it was last year, was like, people don't want to have conversations with their bank or whatever it is. Sometimes they don't want to have conversations with their family, depending on the mood that they're in. So it's about remembering that, you know, having perspective and thinking, okay, how can I make this as efficient and effective as possible for the customer? I hope that answers the question. Bit of a ramble.
It's great. And, you know, I think a lot about brand and persona comes down to consistency, right? So a really good analogy that was used that I like quite a bit when I think about like what is a brand and what does it mean to actually have that brand portrayed is imagine two brands like Marriott and Nike. If Marriott was to make a shoe, do you have any idea what it would look like? Probably not. If Nike was to make a hotel, you can actually do a pretty good job imagining what that would look like. Their brand shines through. It's extremely consistent across surfaces. It's consistent across channels, and they have very strong values. And so I think, you know, one of the most important things about persona is certainly always just consistency and also making your values sort of known. And, you know, jokes are not, you know, persona.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, jump in.
Both too keen. And when it comes to like LLMs, this is more of an open musing than an answer, is how does an LLM perceive a personality or a level of humour? Because it's so subjective and it's such a human response in a lot of cases that would you risk your brand or personality tone with an LLM knowing that even as people, you don't always read personalities right? Are we going to self-generate that in a way that's not going to offend your customers? And even worse, have some kind of regulatory risk, you know, with telco and banking. That's a real issue.
Sorry, just one thing to add as well when it comes to personality. Something that I've noticed over the last couple of weeks is, you know, demos appearing on LinkedIn, etc., where, you know, there's no attempt to make to like flag the fact that a person is talking to a machine at the end of the day. So I feel like with this flurry of activity and hype that people are forgetting or they're not aware of the principles of transparency that we as conversation designers have built and agreed on over these last few years. So I think on our team, we call it being authentically fake. I think we need to build that into the personality, and a lot of other commentators have flagged the need for transparency, especially when these systems can easily trick you, you know. So that's just one point around transparency that needs to be baked into the system prompt and the personality that we create.
I think there's a difference between persona and personality. I think persona is if you're calling into an organization, the persona that you expect to hear is like a call center agent or a customer-facing professional who you expect to be calm, friendly, collected, knowledgeable. That's the persona within the professional discipline that they operate. And personality is separate to that. Whether they're funny or quirky or dour or serious, that's a separate issue, and you can actually leave it off the table, certainly when you're building the persona out in the beginning or the bot out in the beginning, and focus on the persona suitable for the job or what people expect for the self-serve, and I guess deal with personality later.
Totally. And Joseph, sticking with you here, you've built quite a few bots across quite a few industries now working in healthcare. how do you think about LLMs in such a highly regulated space?
Not so much think of them as have a nightmare about them, particularly when executives come bursting into the office and, wow, this is the coolest thing since sliced bread, and let's do this and let's get onto it, and you start looking for Brett's figures or anything else that tells you ChatGPT use is plummeting and bots are going rogue and saying everything. And so, but that doesn't get you anywhere because you have to come up with some practical solution because that's what's being asked of your department. So kind of where I see it at the moment is LLMs are absolutely great for NLU. It helps the understanding on a broad range, especially when you're opening up your bots for us across various channels. It helps keep utterances understood. But I ain't letting it anywhere near NLG. And no brand, I cannot imagine, even through my years as a copywriter, any CEO that would allow a bot to talk directly to a customer without some kind of guardrail or human being determining exactly what it can say and promise to make sure that it stays on brand and to make sure that just because you couldn't get through to us yesterday doesn't mean we're going to give you a car in compensation, which is what maybe a bot could or couldn't do, right? And setting the tone for that conversation, I generally say, in terms of artificial intelligence as an expression, only one word is accurate, and it's not the intelligence word.
That's great. So when it comes to going from deployment to design, design to deployment, we all know that there's a big difference between maybe a conversational engineer and a conversation designer. That's why this industry and this sort of conference exists. What are some of the challenges that you've seen going from, maybe it's handing off a flowchart or a spreadsheet or a Word doc, what have it, over to development, and what are some of the best practices that your team has tried to employ to try to make that handoff a little bit easier between conversation designers and their developer counterparts?
I suppose for us, it's been being embedded in that team. So when we were talking about maybe a centre of excellence, we might not call it that by name, but it kind of is in nature, I suppose. But that's naturally made a relationship where, as I mentioned, that they're full stack designers at Vodafone, so automatically they've got a bit of an advantage there because they're already understanding some of the tech bit. But by being part of cross-functional squads makes that much easier just in terms of handover. We have dedicated engineers to a bot, so even though they're front or back end traditionally, they're dedicated to the product. So I suppose it's all in the team setup, and as Darragh said earlier, I think it's in your platforms. It's going to be naturally easier depending on your platform and the toolings that you've got. Very lucky at Vodafone where we can have those toolings readily available. We're part of a large organisation, so we can share across countries and across different markets to learn those things. So, but ultimately, tooling in the team.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think the last decade, the amount of investment in DevOps it's obviously focused on web development and app development. And that's, we're seeing that industry shift to lower code, but in general, that's all delivered through code and through subject matter experts. That whole DevOps model, the whole CI/CD pipeline process, I've seen conversation design be more effective in a visual sense. So unless you're translating your conversation designs into code, it's going to break that CI/CD that all the investment has gone into. So tooling, I come back to that point earlier, identifying the products that can allow you to take it straight through to market, do the rollbacks, administer, govern, all in one platform is one of the most effective ways to stand up and get started. Otherwise, you're going to have to start picking apart a CI/CD pipeline that's not necessarily been designed for effective voice, effective virtual assistants or voice bots.
There is a pro hack that you can do, because I no longer have any issues with handoff.
Hiring you?
No. That might be more complicated. So, no, it's just something I learned at CDI, and just the way of dealing with the enterprise is one of the things we talk about at CDI is learning who your team is and meeting literally touching base with perhaps the most important people in your team, which would be a creature like you, the product owner.
We've paid each other before we started.
And even perhaps, dare I say, more important, is the solutions architect. and pulling the solutions architect in right from the get-go. I pair up a solutions architect with a conversation designer. That's my team. I expect both of them to come with their concept and their conversation. And what it means is, at the end of the 8-week design period, that design has all the tech notes that it needs. It's already been solved, and the solutions architect has got their name on it, and there isn't a single engineer that will then go back and say, oh, you missed this, or because it's just not there. It's been baked in from the beginning of the conversation design.
I just add that, you know, in an organization like Nat's or Darragh's, you know, they're set up for success, and the design and the dev teams are more integrated, which is fantastic. If the organization has a little bit more of a disjointed or separate, rather, design and dev team, I think in that case, it's, you know, it's the obvious things. It's like, you know, dialogue, it's good documentation, it's ensuring that, you know, whatever needs to happen for those designs to be translated into good products, that it happens. And also it's a two-way process. So, you know, our designers have had instances where something they overlooked, you know, the dev team picked up on. So it works both ways as well. So I think there are probably two things to think about: dialogue and documentation, to make for a successful product.
So we're at the halfway mark. We have about 20 minutes left. I have a whole question bank. I could keep going, but I do want to pause. And I do want to say, does anyone in the audience have any questions? Because we can totally start Q&A now. We can get a few in. I can go back to the question bank. Jump in, yeah. You can yell. You can, yeah, there we go.
There's a lot of things we can learn from the ordinary software development and the deployment process, like automatic testing, test-driven design, and so on. How are you exploring such techniques like automatic testing, test-driven conversational design? Do you anything in this direction?
We do, within Vodafone, have automated testing as part of the development pipeline. So even though it's not necessarily fully released as part of CI/CD, for the issues that Darragh much more articulately spoke about. But the difficulties with automated testing is because of the speed of change as well. So because you can, particularly on low-code platforms or fast releases, you can change those flows so often. You've added an extra layer of almost duplication of making sure those automated tests are as up to speed, as up to date, sorry, as your dialogues. So it's such a politician answer, pros and cons to it all. But I suppose the honest answer is we're trying to get that right at Vodafone, and we've set up a dedicated testing team. So I can't undersell the importance of the testing, and that is somewhat user acceptance testing and then into automated. I don't know if that was useful, but I suppose I want to share the pain.
That important dialogues are tested, so that always work even if you change something.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, just automatic testing, testing the dialogues which have to work. If you change some other parts and if you change the NLU, they could break, but you have to be sure that things which already worked still work.
Yeah. Yeah, and I suppose that's your acceptance criteria into your work as well, and that's why it's really important to have the designers involved up front, because they're going to, as part of the acceptance right at the start when you're gathering your requirements, that's going to inform your tests. So having the designer at that stage is absolutely so critical, else for the reasons you said, like your critical flows are just going to fall over in your tests, and then it's hey, what changed, everyone? Shall we check the documentation? Could have been addressed up front.
A slight build on that as well. I think that's a really interesting application for LLMs, right? So you've been through that experience of having conversation designers, not necessarily testing their own homework, but certainly sharing the testing amongst themselves. You're relying on individuals to generate what they perceive, even though they're qualified, what they perceive as being the input that users are going to take. Apply an LLM to that, you can ask for 200 variants with, you know, a very small input range, and you can then start to feed that into the pipeline. So I think just that broader conversation around LLMs and, you know, people coming into the room saying we need to start doing stuff with ChatGPT and having no context awareness of what that means, I think it's the responsibility of some business professionals to actually take that and articulate that in a more proactive way. And that's not just launching a fully fledged bot to customers. There's so much more that LLMs can be applied to.
Great. Oh, we got a bunch of questions here. Tom, I saw your hand first.
Yeah, this is a question from Eliza Martinez. Should customer service agents really be conversation designers or just input into the process?
That's a spicy question.
I think both. I don't think we need to gatekeep design skills, and I think it's something that you can build. So straight out the gate, you might not know how to craft a really effective dialogue. I don't think it's something that can't be taught. To be a customer service advisor, you've got to have empathy, critical for a designer. You've got to have good personable skills, critical for dialogue. So I don't think this industry or this area is benefited by gatekeeping those skills behind a design title.
I'm going to be boring and completely agree with Nat. I think that absolutely customer service agents have all of those skills and more, good communication skills usually. And, you know, with training, with knowledge of the tools, they can absolutely become a fantastic conversation designers. So, like, you know, we worked recently with a team. Some of them had 15 to 20 years experience talking to customers. I mean, if you're a conversation designer coming into an organization out of the gate with knowledge of conversation design, that knowledge of the customer and their problems and their needs is very hard to just magic up. So I agree with that.
And just to, it's another diverse background. I think a lot of conversation designers we've got, I'm going to call out someone who joined our team whose background is in meteorology, and mine is in design. Someone else's is journalism. Why isn't customer service just another one of those diverse backgrounds? Like, it's only going to make your team stronger. So build on those skills, really.
Alrighty.
Here you go. It's all right. I've got it.
Hiya. So one of the biggest things about virtual assistants is making sure that you hear the voice of the customer. Obviously, as things grow, it's going to get much harder to do it at scale. So how do you make sure that that voice is heard, both for your voice and chatbot assistants?
I'm going to press for a little clarification. Do you mean on the actual speech recognition itself, or do you mean on like voice of the customer in the data?
So from a conversational analysis point of view, so we can use that insight to help drive performance and make sure that the solutions are working as well as they can and driving value. So how do you make sure that you keep ahead of that and listen?
You have to read the data. You have to sit there and go through all 18,000 utterances that you get every Friday. If you're lucky, maybe use a large language model to label and parse what you have to read. But at some point, there's no automation. There's just hard work, and you've got to sit and read through it all and try and get a sense of what people are saying, what they're meaning. Like you say, your call center agents are a gold mine of information. And that's how you got to do it. You just got to work through it.
And the measurements of, it's going to be dependent on your organisation and what your goals are. If cost saving, for example, is something that's really important to your bot, then balancing that containment goal with the feedback from your customers is going to help you inject their voice into the dialogues, because you've got a goal over here that you know you've got to achieve, but also what are customers telling you? What are they saying is wrong or right with this flow? So the measurement and getting that right, there's some really obvious ones like TNPS, which are shared across different industries or different companies, but then you can create your own quality metrics as well, which helps you then learn what the good, the bad, the ugly is in your dialogues and change it off the back of that feedback.
we've got an equally interesting and boring kind of trend in telco where we can see a lot of our customer contacts, you know, volume-wise, is tied up in probably less than 24 intents. But in terms of absolute coverage of content, we're talking about thousands and thousands of pages of support content and FAQs. So in terms of a strategy for approaching that, my view is we should be focusing all of the optimization, all of the design and the effort that's manual with humans on addressing those, let's say, 24 flows. Again, I think that's where the LLM model becomes really useful for maybe the other 20% of the volume, but probably represents 80% of the scope of content that we have to manage, is try and feed that through an LLM and get responses on the edge cases and the outliers so that we don't have to spend so much of the team's time manually doing that. The problem we've got with that is LLMs aren't consistent in terms of what they say, so they might share the same information back, but they might phrase it in a completely different way for customer A and customer B. And for a company like mine, where we're focused on containment, if we're giving customer A and customer B the same information, one of them decides to self-serve and the other one doesn't, how do we understand how effective the LLM was there? Do we need to go through another manual retraining process with the LLM? So I think for any business, it's just about understanding the core content that your base wants to engage with and building a team around managing that, and then using some of these other tactics and strategies with some of the other technology to play out the additional pieces.
Great. So with that, we have about 10 minutes left. We're going to move to a speed round where it's going to be 1 minute answers.
You didn't tell us about this.
I like to keep it fresh. And so if folks have questions, if not, I'm going to ask some questions. So any questions from the audience here?
Somebody, please.
We're going right here.
Firstly, thanks all. This is a really great conversation. I'm really enjoying it. So one of you mentioned the phrase full stack designer, and I interpreted that differently because working with enterprises, what I see a lot of the time is that, of course, the conversation is part of a larger digital journey, and where the wheels come off is kind of on the start and end of things, right? So your chatbot is inside a mobile app. It sends a deep link. That page changed, or it doesn't work anymore, or it doesn't work on Android, or the bot lives on the homepage of the website, and the marketing team puts a massive new promotion on the landing page. Didn't tell the bot team about it, right? It's part of. So when I think full stack design, I think end-to-end user journey. And so I wonder if you have any thoughts also with respect to then how you structure your teams or how you organize your work on that topic.
The amount of PTSD I saw as you were asking your question, people are like, oh, I hate when that happens. So,
I suppose when I describe our full stack team, it's more specifically about, I suppose, that experience within the UI for our chatbot at the moment, and more focus on that. I suppose it's acknowledgement that they do the development as well. But you are right; it's that service design lens of, hey, we are one chunk in this overall customer journey. And often, back to the answer we just had around measurement, sometimes that broken service journey is reflected in your bot, and your poor bot's in the middle going, it's not my fault, I'm so sorry. But I suppose there's no easy way to do it, because it's going to be how you are embedded in your digital organisation, who owns those customer journeys, and that's going to change depending on the size and complexity of your company. But the full stack element, at least, is around specifically chatbot development in our case. And we're really looking at our team tend to look at that whole picture. I suppose the difficulty when you're as big as Vodafone is finding the person that owns that broken page. But yeah, hope that's somewhat answered.
There's an argument to say as well that that's not necessarily the responsibility of the chatbot team. Functionally, you're looking at stuff that's more around service mapping at that point, which should be a cross-functional effort from the whole organisation. I'm angling that more towards larger businesses again, but there should be accountability for customer experience right through on a horizontal level, and that would address that problem. Chatbot's just another channel in that sense.
Whereas I would do it vertically. For me, a full-stack designer is somebody who can design a conversation, can do the advanced copywriting to make sure that it really does engage meaningfully with callers, and at the same time also be able to train their bot. So it's those three disciplines: it's design, copywriting, and training. For me, as a full stack conversation designer, and something I expect from everyone on my team, with the exception of copywriting, I guess, because it's a unique skill that people, I find, either have a feel for or not. But I see it as a vertical designation.
I think just these are all great points. I think just to add, you know, at the sometimes what I see is at the beginning of a project when an organization is either, you know, launching a bot or scaling up, everybody's involved, everyone's excited, the marketing teams are involved, and there's a flurry of activity. I think the key is to keep that collaboration and that communication consistent throughout, so you don't end up with scenarios like you mentioned. So it's again, if one team owns that entire customer experience across the organization, you know, that can really help to have that, you know, central team that has responsibility for experience across the organization. But I think, yeah, that we see that quite a lot. You know, there's initially a lot of engagement, and then it kind of wanes, and, you know, each team goes off and does their own thing. So it's about keeping that whole together, if that helps.
I have one question myself, and then Tom, I'll get you next. So as conversation design changes, it has been a joy to see conversation design get a larger seat at the table over the past couple of years, but we're still not there yet, right? This is not a 2,000 person room, it's a 200 person room. And so I want to ask each of the, yes, Unparsed 2024. I want to ask each of the panelists, how do you work with stakeholders to identify and cement the ROI of conversation design? And then also, how do you see that changing over the next 2 or 3 years with LLMs as well?
On the stakeholder part, I'm still mulling over the LLM part, is proving value up front. So, and also there's a responsibility for kind of your design leadership or your product leadership to put the designers in the room. So that kind of sponsorship element within your organization is really hard. It's not quite evangelism. You don't need an evangelist necessarily, but kind of do that in your organization. Put the designers in the room up front and talk about how that translates to your business metrics. So mentioned earlier containment, if that's a key KPI for your business, mention how you may achieve that. And it's as much an education piece, I suppose, as it's new as anything. Anyone that was in the UX world, it's a similar problem a few years ago around how do I tell you that this is going to do the right thing, other than this is the right thing to do. But now you can be flexible with the measures that back up that this is the right thing to do, whether that's kind of functional accuracy, experience-based, TMPS, or effort scores, that sort of thing. Enable your designers to tie that to their work directly, and that's going to need some structural stuff as well in terms of your data and reporting, really.
We can save the LLM piece to the last minute question. Grace.
I think just to your first point about, I'm preaching to the choir here, obviously, but, talking to people in your organization about the importance of conversation design. I think from the start for me, it was about this idea that, and it happens, it's something that I've encountered with content design more generally. People think because we all have conversations all day and every day, they're somehow easy to create. And I think folks like Elizabeth Stocko, conversational analysts, who talk about the complexity, the multi-layered aspects of language, how difficult they are, how human-to-human conversations are just filled with these little hacks and tricks that we have to keep them going. I think that has been definitely like a key theme in how I've talked about conversation design, especially in the early days. And I think, well, I'm not supposed to talk about the LLM, but no.
We'll save that for the last minute.
Okay.
It's a really simple one for me. In our industry, it's follow the money, right? So if I can demonstrate to the business how hiring these particular people with these skills can take costs out appropriately and still deliver an appropriate and good customer experience, that's how we're going to get it done.
Love it.
I think also just transmitting the benefits to the business side of the house as to what conversation design can achieve. My favorite example is, would you rather speak to all 6,000 call center agents to figure out what your callers are really saying, or do you just want to ask your chatbot? He also speaks to 6,000 people and can give you an answer instantly, and then reduce the digital debt and the cost of an answer dramatically.
Great. I was totally going to ask the second part, but we have 35 seconds left, and I feel like it's been an hour. Tom.
No, it's fine. I just got to apologise to the people online that the questions weren't getting through for some technical problems.
No worries. Well, with that, folks, thanks so much to our panel for coming out. This was great. And for all the questions that we didn't get to, they'll be walking around. You can come hang out with them, come ask them questions. It's a small group. Don't be afraid. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Round of applause for our panel, please, ladies and gentlemen.